Welcome. Welcome, Jackie. Welcome, Shelly. Welcome, Kate. Fairfield is represented. Cheshire. So we have over 100 people who registered for the webinar, so we'll give it a few more minutes just before we get started. Okay. Okay, well, it's 12:30, so we'll kick off. Again, please feel free to write in the chat, tell us where you're from, tell us whether you're a realtor, a landlord, a property owner. We're definitely interested in finding out where everyone is from and getting to know you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taniqua Huguley. I am the Outreach Director of Open Communities Alliance. On behalf of OCA, I would like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. This webinar, Doing Well While Doing Good, was created because we wanted to provide a platform to educate landlords and other housing providers, particularly in resource-rich, high opportunity areas, about our housing voucher programs. The goal of this webinar is to connect with landlords and residential management companies that may not have had the opportunity in the past to work with families with vouchers, and quite honestly may have some concerns about the program or participants. And so the goal of this webinar is to provide general information about how housing voucher programs work, and hopefully we can dispel some myths that you may have. We also want to discuss and think practically about the program challenges by sharing the experiences of successful housing providers and partners here in Connecticut and in other parts of the country. Our hope is that this webinar will discourage discrimination and encourage housing providers to consider playing a more active role in recruiting and renting to voucher holders as a way of both doing well financially, meaning this will help you gain reliable income, steady streams of income and longer term tenants, while also doing good. So by complying with state and federal laws and ensuring that desegregating affordable housing options are available. Today, we're joined by OCA's Executive Director, Erin Boggs, the Managing Directors of Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, Pete Cimbolic and Sheila Proano, the Chief Financial Officer of the Metro Realty Group, Robert Idleman, and last but not least, the Director of Housing Coordination of My Sister's Place, John Thomas. So thank you again for joining us. We have a few minutes designated at the end for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for questions. And I'll now pass it over to Erin. Erin, I'm not sure if we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Erin Boggs, Executive Director of Open Communities Alliance, and I'm going to start by sharing really an overview of it's a reason that we're interested in this, and then talk a little bit about framing out the program just as a really from a 5,000 foot level, because we're trying to do this efficiently and get everyone some information during lunch. We know that we're only able to do the sort of big version of this, and we're hoping to have future trainings for some of the more detailed stuff. So we're here because Connecticut is facing both an affordability crisis. We are one of the least affordable states in the country. We have the 10th highest housing wage in the nation. A family would have to work 96 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. We've done a study that shows we need about 135,000 additional affordable units. We're also one of the most segregated states in the nation. On this map, the dark reddish orange areas are the places that are in the top 10% of most segregated. Connecticut, as you can see, is more segregated than any place in the South. And part of the reason we're concerned about this is it has an impact on access to opportunity, both because there is poverty concentration in areas that are struggling and a lack of access to areas that are really thriving, areas that we call high opportunity areas. And we've mapped this based on data about educational outcomes, employment data, and neighborhood data like crime rates and home ownership rates and poverty rates. We get a map that looks like this. Those dark orange areas are places that are really thriving. The lightly shaded places are places that are struggling and need additional investment. We can map this with other things as well. So those blue dots indicate where families of color are living. And through this, we learn that in Connecticut, Black and Latino families are living in those low and very low opportunity areas at much higher rates. So 74% of Black families and 68% of Latino families are living in low and very low opportunity areas, as compared to only 25% of white households and 32% of Asians. All these factors combine with other circumstances like a long history of intentional discrimination and segregation and other practices like ongoing employment discrimination to create real disparities across issue areas from health to education to incarceration, but also disparities in income and wealth. In Connecticut, Blacks and Latinos are earning about half or less of what whites are earning and have about a tenth of or less of the wealth. And this is why housing programs end up being so important, and the access to affordable housing ends up being so important. If you're interested in the history of all of this, I'm not going to go into it, but there's a fantastic book, The Color of Law, you might check out. So zeroing in on those housing programs, and particularly the housing voucher program, very in a very big picture way, what are housing voucher programs? They provide a voucher to lower income families, usually at 50% of area median income or below, that can be used in the general rental housing market. The voucher family pays 30 to 40% of its income towards rent, and the program pays the rest up to a cap called a payment standard. And the reason we're worried about all of this and have some red flags have gone up from a fair housing perspective is that in Connecticut, 78% of Housing Choice Voucher Program participants, that's the main federal voucher program, are Black or Latino. A voucher holder is 3 times more likely to have a member with a disability than the average Connecticut household, and over 90% of voucher households with children are headed by a single mother. So all of those kinds of categories of characteristics are protected by the Fair Housing Act. And so, we have to keep a careful tabs on what's going on with the program to make sure that we aren't running into fair housing concerns. And there's some indications that we are, because when we look at where voucher households are living, they're living overwhelmingly in certain areas of the state, and those are lower opportunity areas. This is the map of where the state's program, the rental assistance program participants are living. So we're seeing some real segregating patterns. And when we look back at the protections under the Fair Housing Act, under the federal law, it's protections against discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender, disability, and familial status. And then under state law, we've got protections against discrimination based on gender identity or expression, lawful source of income, and that includes the use of a voucher, and then age. we see that we need to really be keeping an eye on what's going on with voucher programs, both because of who's participating and because of where families appear to have access to units. So in Connecticut, there are two main voucher programs, and they come in different flavors, particularly the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is funded by the federal government. That money from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, can go to regular town housing authorities. It can go to regional programs, and really there's one in Connecticut, and that's run by the city of Hartford through a contractor called Imagineers, or run by the Department of Housing through a contractor called D'Amelia and Associates. There's a second type of voucher program, which, as I mentioned, is the rental assistance program, and that is funded by the state. It is also run by the Department of Housing via its contractor, D'Amelia and Associates. Very, very basically, the way these programs work is there's a rental agreement between the landlord and a tenant, and an agreement between the Department of Housing, or HUD, and the landlord. And then the tenant is responsible for the security deposit. The tenant household pays its portion of its income, 30 to 40%. The housing authority pays the rest. Utilities may be included in the rent or not, but I would say for voucher holders and for working with this program, it helps tremendously to have the utilities included. I want to talk for a minute about this payment standard, sort of the cap on the value of the voucher. It has two pieces. One is something called the fair market rent, which is issued by HUD, and that's a dollar figure for the value of the voucher from HUD that is intended to give voucher families access to 40% of the rental units in a region. And then that can be either augmented or reduced by the local housing authority, considering what is going on with the local market. Now, because what we found was that even with this, even with that discretion from housing authorities, the payment standards often didn't reach the level of rents in many places that were hotter markets or more likely to be higher opportunity. That there were a lot of units were off limits to families, and so the Obama administration sort of started a almost like a trial pilot program in 25 communities around the country, where they calculated the value of the voucher based on the sort of more of a micro market, so based on zip codes. And fortunately, Connecticut has one of these. Is one of these pilot locations that is using something called the small area fair market rent. This means that the value of the voucher is likely to be higher in places where the rental market is demanding higher rents. And that is in use in the Hartford region, so all through the center of Connecticut. The way that rent is figured out, or the value of the voucher is figured out for these programs, can be confusing. It's more than just those factors I talked about. There's also an analysis that the housing authority will do to make sure that what's being used for rent is fair. So we've created an app to try to help with this, that will sort of share the value offered for vouchers with bedrooms of different sizes by different housing authorities. I encourage everyone, when you're using this, to always double check it with the housing authority, because these things do change quickly. We try to get this information and keep it up to date, but it's hard. And if you're a housing authority, please send us your payment standards, because we can update our app with it. What you can do is, really, we intended it for voucher holders, but housing providers can use it too. You can enter an address in the search bar, or you can just click on a census tract, and you will get a box on a pop-up box on the map that looks like this. You get the opportunity level for the area. You get to put in the number of bedrooms that you might have, and then it will show you the various payment standards. So here in Glastonbury, the Department of Housing's Housing Choice Voucher Program, as I said, run by D'Amelia, will pay $21 $100 and change. The City of Hartford's program, which is that regional program, will pay $1,900. The Rental Assistance Program will pay $2,000 and change, and the Glastonbury Housing Authority will pay $1,900 and change. Often you won't get 4 different entities operating in the same region. Usually it'll be more like 2 or 3, but this is how this system works. I know I'm breezing through the program details because I want to really move us over to other folks. But if you're interested in this, I encourage you to check out Doing Well by Doing Good on our website, which has a lot more program details and really refers you to all kinds of other resources that are out there. Mobility counseling is a really fantastic element to bring to the voucher program when it's possible. It's a process by which a counselor sort of offers an intervention with a family that has a voucher that is, considering where to live, including maybe moving to some of those higher opportunity areas, which would represent a desegregating move. Counseling programs will work with families to think through their priorities when looking at a home, ensuring families are rent ready, recruit landlords from higher opportunity communities, help vouchers find affordable units, and then act as a liaison between the family, their new neighborhood, the housing authority, and the landlord. We have 2, we're really fortunate to have 2 mobility counseling programs represented here today. As Taniqua mentioned, Pete Cimbolic and Sheila Proano are here from the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, which I think of as sort of the flagship, one of the flagship mobility counseling programs in the country. They're going to share information on their program with us, but also how they've interacted and partnered with landlords. And then we also have a new mobility counseling program here in Connecticut, run by My Sister's Place, and John Thomas will then give us a quick overview of the program. And actually, I'm forgetting the order, but we'll also have some input from a real landlord. So that's all I have today, and I will hand it off.
Thank you, Erin, for really setting the stage and providing that background information. And so now we'll hand it off to Pete and Sheila. They are both managing directors over at the Baltimore Housing Mobility, who are representing the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program, but from the Baltimore Regional Housing Project,
Thank you so much for that, Taniqua. I'll introduce myself while we get our slides prepared. My name is Sheila Proano, and as Taniqua mentioned, I am the Managing Director of Program Administration for the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. I'll explain how the 2 function together because you did hear 2 different names, the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program and the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. So part of this presentation will explain that connection. And again, thank you, Erin, for that complete overview of how housing choice vouchers work. I know how confusing that can be. And thank you to you property partners, property owners, real estate agents, all of you that are here today. You're an essential part of the success of voucher holders leasing and other renters in the community. So I'm very grateful that you're prepared to take this information back to your colleagues. So we will begin, and let me go ahead and start by explaining about our program. The Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, we're actually a nonprofit organization, and that makes us unique in terms of a public housing agency or PHA that administers a housing choice voucher. So like Erin was explaining, we use the federal funds for the housing choice vouchers, but what makes us different and makes us a mobility program is that we couple that assistance and that subsidy with mobility counseling. So we help prepare the family for moving to a neighborhood that is an opportunity area. We provide supports and help them break barriers and transition to these new communities. And we provide follow-up check-ins with the family on regular occasions. And that helps our families be successful in moving to safe, healthy, and economically vibrant communities. So how did BRHP acquire the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program? Well, this is going to require us to go back in time. So let's review this timeline to help paint a fuller picture of what led to our program. So in 1995, there was a lawsuit filed by the ACLU of Maryland, as well as families that lived in Baltimore high-rise project housing. So these are the families that were the victims of the segregation that Erin was mentioning earlier, living in concentrated poverty housing. They realized that it was the housing authority that was essentially forcing them to live in these neighborhoods that had very low opportunity. So the ACLU of Maryland filed a suit against the Housing Authority of Baltimore City and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It took some time. Well, actually, the first year there was a partial consent. So the government did agree that there was some fault for why families were living in these poor and concentrated poverty areas and neighborhoods. So some vouchers were set aside to be administered by the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program. Leasing didn't begin until 2002, and a final settlement with the lawsuit in the courts didn't end until 2012. And upon final settlement, an additional 1,700 vouchers were awarded to the Baltimore Housing Mobility Program. In 2013, the program subcontracted with us, the Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership. So we assumed full management of the program in 2015. And in that time, we have helped over 5,000 families transition to higher opportunity neighborhoods. And our partnerships and strengths grow with your support. So thank you. How do we help our families move to these opportunity areas? Well, a lot of it has to do with our counseling support. So we have interactive workshops that families participate in for their introduction into our counseling programs. So they learn about controlling debt, paying down past debts, getting credit repair, and learning how to maintain the unit. These interactive workshops help the family get ready to move to a new neighborhood and assume the responsibility of a renter and everything that would be their obligation under the terms of the lease. We also provide individual training plans. So we look at every voucher holder's personal debt, their personal credit repair, and we provide them with a plan to help get them lease ready, and so that they are competitive in the renters market when reviewing homes. We provide housing search assistance, and that's in the form of a landlord relationship specialist whose full-time job is to connect with property owners and be the one connect in our housing agency that any property owner or questions can be filtered through. So you may have heard that it can be difficult to get in touch with someone at a PHA. Well, we have one person on staff that is essentially the main communicator to our property partners and landlords. We also provide generous search time, knowing that it takes about 90 days for the family to successfully lease. So a normal housing choice voucher will be active for 60 days. Our housing search time is far greater than that amount. And I mentioned the landlord outreach that we provide. So we also introduce our families to opportunity areas. So these are census tracts in our region that we have reviewed to determine the crime rate, the poverty rate, access to resources, school ratings, and other criteria that would either determine the census tract is considered opportunity or non-opportunity. We also have a pretty efficient leasing process. So because we administer the voucher ourselves in-house, our counselors and our HCV team are in the same building. So a lot of communication can happen. If the counselor knows that the family is facing a very dire move situation and we need to move the voucher along very quickly, our communication avenues are open because we have an efficient leasing process and all working together in-house. And lastly, we provide post-move counseling support. And that is individual check-ins with the counselor and the family in their first 2 years of tenancy in an opportunity area. So we do 4 check-ins in that 2-year period, just to make sure that the family feels connected and plugged into their new community. So next slide. This is a photo of our map. So this is our Baltimore region. And those purple dots represent where families lived before they received their voucher in our program. And the orangey area is what we have coded as non-opportunity, and you can see that most of those dots are located in non-opportunity areas. And the green represents the census tracts that we have analyzed and determined that they are opportunity areas. So the blue dots that you see now are locations where those families leased after receiving a voucher. And as you can see, our families are moving to opportunity areas in our community. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the Baltimore region, but our opportunity areas are in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Harford and Howard County, Anne Arundel County, and Carroll County. So next slide. And so now I'll be turning things over to my colleague, Pete Cimbolic, to explain a little bit about myths and facts for voucher holders and receiving subsidy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, my name is Pete Cimbolic, and I'm the Managing Director of Operations and Program Evaluation here at BRHB. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the myths that folks often have about voucher holders and the voucher program generally. And so one of the first is that housing choice voucher tenants are unemployed. And with our program, more than half are families with wage income. And so those are working families who are supporting their families with their income. Another myth is that the accepting of voucher holders only benefits the tenants. And this is one of those, probably one of the biggest myths. Our program contributes $80 million annually to the regional economy. And so those are payments, direct rental assistance payments that are being provided to private owners who rent the homes to the families that we serve. Another myth is that the Section 8 housing is often located in undesirable and impoverished areas. This is where the partnership of landlords like you and real estate agents and the like really comes into play in sort of breaking that cycle, where you see that there are concentrations of voucher holders in certain areas. Finding units and landlords willing to rent to voucher holders outside of those areas is one of the key components to a successful program and to breaking that cycle. So the use of vouchers produces savings in other spheres in terms of public health, healthcare, child welfare, and criminal justice. So that's something that we wanted to make sure folks understand, that it's not just the rental assistance that's being provided, but there's other benefits that really are reaped years down the line as well. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about our program and what we've been able to achieve. So as Sheila mentioned, we've served over 5,000 families. We have about 4,300 active families with our program. And that's over 2,300 owners who are leasing units to those families. So that's 55 property owners for every 100 BRHB HCV households. And that is much higher than what you see nationally. There's only about 33 landlords for every 100 voucher holders nationally across the US. And this is a problem that HUD has seen and is giving added attention to and giving added flexibilities to housing authorities in order to overcome. For our owners, there's 79% have only one unit leased with us. And so by and large, they're just mom and pop landlords who have decided to take the plunge and have found success with our program. And then 16% of the owners have 2 to 5 units leased with us. In terms of the benefits for the property partners who are with our program, again, they're counseled families. So these are families receiving the counseling supports. But with any voucher program, you're going to see that there are screened families. These are families who have already undergone the screening that is required for the receipt of the voucher, both in terms of income and criminal, as well as some other factors. So that's important to keep in mind, that these voucher holders have been screened for criminal as well as income. In our program, there's a dedicated counselor to assist with issues, and that's true of many of the mobility programs and the ones that are operating in Connecticut. Timely payments, and this is a big key here. You know, our payments go out by a direct deposit on the first of the month. You never have to wait for your money, and that's a steady stream of income for your property. Biennial unit inspections, we perform them once every 2 years. Some owners look at unit inspections as sort of a hurdle, but in a lot of ways, it's another set of eyes on your property. It's a professional coming in to help spot issues that could cause damage down the road. So it's a service that we like to provide. We have an online portal where you can view payments and inspection details, and then of course that ongoing support that we provide not only to the tenants, but also to the landlords who are part of our program, wanting to make sure that their needs are being met and that we're providing adequate service. For our families who are coming to the program, they were from neighborhoods with a 29% poverty rate, and then they moved to a 5% poverty rate neighborhood. There's a very high success rate in terms of the lease up. And as Sheila mentioned, it's about 95 days to take from a family to receive the voucher to lease. So I just wanted to make sure we covered this slide, and I know I'm running a little short on time here, but just globally stepping back in terms of the advantages of the Housing Choice Voucher from a landlord perspective. Number one is the lower vacancy and turnover rates. HCV households remain in units for far longer than unassisted households. And so from your perspective, in terms of having to spend the money to turn over a unit, to market a unit, you're going to be doing far less of that on average if you have a voucher family in that unit. Again, that reliable income, those rent payments are protected by the voucher when income is lost. And just share a quick anecdote from one of our largest property partners who we work with. They have about 50 BRHP families, and they have about 250 overall units in their portfolio. And when the pandemic hit, they saw that the collection rates for their voucher units were staying well over 95%. So receiving most of the income, that's the rental income that was due. But for their non-assisted units, that rental, the collection rate dipped below 80% and even almost down below 70%. So it's a really good way to protect your income by allowing a voucher holder into your unit, leasing a voucher holder in your unit. The annual rent increases, most programs allow for reasonable rent increases annually. Again, you're not, when you accept a voucher, you're not tied to that rent forever. You can increase the rent as the payment standards increasing. You're able to request those rent increases to stay in line with what the market is doing. And then lastly, the HCV households themselves. They're incentivized to remain compliant with the lease. If they're not compliant with the lease, they face termination possibly. And of course, that would be a huge blow to them financially and economically. And so they have a lot of skin in the game in terms of wanting to stay compliant with the lease and compliant with the program rules and regulations. So whereas with unassisted renter, there's really nothing in terms of a carrot or a stick to incentivize them. With HCV households, there is, because that voucher is a valuable asset to that family. So with that, I think that was our last slide. Yes, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Pete. Thank you, Sheila. And so I know a few people had questions in the chat, so please feel free to continue to ask questions in the Q&A feature. And thank you to the panelists for answering those questions as well. So now I would like to hand over this virtual platform stage to Rob Idleman, who is the CFO and the co-director of asset management for the Metro Realty Group.
Thank you, Taniqua. Hi, everyone. I just want to start off by saying, that was a great presentation, and I actually agree with a lot of the same points being made. We have hundreds of voucher holders in our apartment group, and they are there for a long period of time. And I think, as you addressed, Pete, was that it became more apparent during this pandemic than anything else. That voucher holder money kept coming in, and we had plenty of tenants that were not making their rent payments for obvious reasons and understandable reasons, and it made it more manageable of a process as a landlord. I've seen some questions here and there regarding, the time and the process with leasing these units and the inspection process as well. And we've seen in our experience that to say there's nothing is not true. Obviously, there is a process to it, but we don't find it to be much of a different process for underwriting most tenants. I mean, it's not quite a market rate tenant where there's almost no underwriting. But if you're looking at any other low income program or other programs, it's a very similar process where you're working with the local housing authority, or as mentioned, DOH and their contractors. And we're able to work with them, get the inspection together, review the units. Usually it's not a problem in our units, and able to lease these units very well and come to terms with the housing authority or the contractor, and continuously just, we get those rent bumps every year. We're able to handle the inspection, and the family members that are in these units are long-term tenants that are great. I don't differentiate that group of people versus any of our other tenant mix. You wouldn't even, I think you wouldn't even really know the difference unless you saw the paperwork on it, so just to kind of support and agree with a lot of the presentation being presented. We've had a lot of success with that program, and even find it to be a very good benefit when leasing these units and keeping our occupancy levels high and keeping our income levels, our revenues going as we continue to lease out units. That's it, unless you need me to speak more on any other questions.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about, so I see in the chat there are a few questions about, the waiting period and the process of, a landlord who may want to get involved with the program. Can you talk a little bit about that? But can you also talk about, so Metro Realty is well known in the Connecticut area. Can you talk about overall the landlord tenant experience that you all have had?
Sure. So in terms of a process, there is a process, but I think it, like I kind of alluded to, it kind of mirrors to our internal process anyway, where yes, you're working with the local housing authority or contractor, and it does take, I'd probably say on average, it's probably about 60 days. But that probably includes into the move-in as well. So maybe from beginning to end, it's about 60 days. But as I think is alluded to, when you get somebody in, it is a long-term situation. So it's not like it's, oh, I'm going through that same process every year. It's more like it's a one-time situation with that tenant. And then, you have a tenant for life, or for a long period of time, and it's a mutually beneficial situation.
Okay.
Remind me, what was your second question again?
Oh, just if you can, give us a little more insight about the the experience that Metro Realty has had with Section 8 tenants over the years, and if you can share a little bit about what's working and what could use improvement, because Metro Realty has been around for quite some time, and you all have several properties, and so I think that will be helpful for this discussion, just to talk a little bit about what you've seen and the positive, and feel free to share the negative experiences that you all have had. But I think you've been around for a while, and you're here in the state of Connecticut, so many of our panelists will love to hear about that landlord-tenant experience.
Sure. So, I mean, we have about 1,400 units in central Connecticut, and we have a good experience with that. Maybe there is some to that to be of our side and our relationship with these local agencies, where they know who we are and we've built up that relationship. And so we have benefited from that. I do think the experience we've had with our tenants, it has been, for the most part, a good one. I've never made, I mean, we do have situations where tenants are not always, from a landlord perspective, maybe courteous to the unit, not maintaining it as well. But I found that more to be specific to the person and not necessarily like a group or a class of people. It tends to be like, maybe you occasionally get that bad egg or whatever when you lease to, thousands of people. And to be honest, we've seen that with people with high income as well, not even affordable tenants. So it's not subject to a group or asset class. So we've always had we've had a good relationship. We've leased these type of units for, like you mentioned, probably 20 to 30 years at this point, and continue to do so. And it's definitely very prevalent throughout. We see a lot in our family unit, and even see some carry over into our elderly complexes, where they actually move on and graduate, I guess, into those elderly complexes as they get older. We are, we've worked with Erin for many years and are in complete support of like the whole suburban opportunity zones, I guess you're referring to it as, where bringing these low-income families into better school system, quote unquote, breaking the cycle, so that's like they get more opportunities. They're in these really, great situations for the family and the children. And we've seen the benefit of these children graduating and, possibly going to college or just getting off to a better start than, maybe if they're in a different situation.
Nice. Thank you, Rob. And so I'm sure folks will probably have some more questions for you during the Q&A portion, but thank you so much for sharing. And so last but not least, I would like to welcome John Thomas, the Director of Housing Coordination at My Sister's Place, to our virtual platform stage. And John, thank you again for really being a part of the team to kick off this new mobility counseling program. So I'm going to pass it off to you, and then we'll end with some questions and answers. So please feel free to keep the questions going. I see folks are using the chat. If you can use the Q&A session, feature, that will definitely help organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taniqua. Just gonna share my screen quick. Oh.
You should be all set.
Oh, it's good. Okay, thank you. Bear with me. One second. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank OCA for inviting us to this event. It's great to see everyone here. And as you heard before, I am the Director of Housing Coordination at My Sister's Place. I've been with the organization for about 12 years now, through multiple positions and promotions. So I won't take too long here because I know I have a finite amount of time to speak. But as previously shared throughout this presentation, we're in a problem situation in Connecticut It's ranked one of the most segregated states in the US. I'm sure many of you know that. We also have some of the highest income inequality in our state. As you've heard, and you can probably guess, a lot of voucher holders tend to live around cities. So basically, what we're trying to do with housing mobility is a solution to try and level the playing field and allow people to access higher opportunities. So this speaks about what we're doing at in our program. And research has shown in housing mobility, it's shown improvements in education, better health, less crime, better employment. And a lot of our clients are generated from the Section 8, HCV, and RAP certification lists, as well as through marketing word of mouth that we do. So this talks about what we do. Obviously, apartment placements. We're submitting paperwork to the RAP and Section 8 programs, the PHAs. We're applying for security deposits. We're doing landlord relationship management and housing education. We do financial education with our clients. We do credit repair, budgeting, saving, and case management. So this talks about some of the stuff that we've done to try and market our program, which includes email marketing, social media. There's our website right here. I'm going to drop our contact details into the chat so you all can see it, as well as several other things that we do to market our program. So this is the main piece I want to speak about in my time. And this has to do with our process. So we basically do a three-phase process, starting with outreach. Under outreach, we're reaching the target population, the voucher holders. We're doing pre-search counseling with the clients, and we're also outreaching landlords. During phase two, we're doing active counseling. We're basically, you can see here, this is our client handbook. It's pretty thick. Doing education with them, trying to teach them about credit, budgeting, how to become a better tenant, etc. Once we're able to get through some of that, then we begin the apartment showings. I think that's where where all of you would come in, do the showings, completing the paperwork, and then finally the inspection. The other thing I'll point out is we do aftercare for up to 2 years after the client moves. So that helps alleviate any issues that might arise. This talks about who we are. I think all of my staff is here today. So we have 3 housing counselors, 1 housing specialist, and 1 admin assistant. Our backgrounds include case management, housing, property management, real estate, investing, and entrepreneurship. And those folks include Ted, whom many of you might have spoken to before, as our housing specialist. We have Monica, Don, Kimberly, and Mandy, and they're all here, which helps put faces to names as well. This is a look at our brochure, which is mostly geared towards our clients, and that just gives you an idea of some of the things that we're about. Okay, and then I'm going to, bear with me, I'm just going to share a different screen. Okay, and this is our landlord brochure. This is also available on our website. And this kind of speaks to some of the things I've already spoken about. I'd like to point out that a year ago today, our program didn't even exist. After we were able to secure funding, I developed this program based on the good practices of other programs such as Baltimore. If you fast forward 8 or 9 months, we've been working with 73 families, still working with them in many cases. That translates to about 174 people, including lots of children. So really what we're talking about here is trying to help the kids, help the families. We want to provide them more opportunities. But the hardest part, as you know, can be in placing them. So we really need your help. I know many of you are already connected with us, but if you aren't, please reach out. We'd like to work together with you as housing partners to help people find a better life. And we're seeing an uptick in tenant interest as moving season really gets underway. So please reach out if you haven't already, or if you have and haven't spoken to us in a while, we'd love to hear from you. And I'm out of time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Erin, Pete, Sheila, Rob, and John for all the information that you're sharing. So there are quite a few questions and conversation happening in the chat. So thank you, Sheila and Erin. I see that you all got a kick start on answering a few questions. So hold on, I just want to make sure I answer things in the right order. A few folks asked a little bit about, you know, the overall process, or one woman shared her experience with Section 8. She said that it took months, right? And unfortunately, I know that that's not always the case. So can someone who works with landlords or is a provider, either Rob or Sheila and Pete, can you talk a little bit about that process and how it varies?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So it does vary. I think it did get slowed down a little bit with the pandemic, and that, but I think that was the case with, you know, pretty much everything. But typically what we found is, I mean, obviously the paperwork, and there is an inspection that usually occurs before the tenant moves in. At least that's what we do in our cases. Usually, you know, they're able to move in shortly thereafter, as long as it's what I would call, you know, minor items, or just, you know, punch list stuff where maybe we can fix it as they go in and just have another inspection later. So we found that the paperwork, you know, can move along, especially as you build a relationship with those different places. And a lot of times what we do, just to keep things efficient, at least on our side, is we do start the process, especially if we have before even the existing tenant may be in there. Like if we get move out notification, we can start the process ahead of time. So there is at least less of a lag or vacant period in between an old tenant or a new tenant. Like everything, I guess that, you know, in a perfect world, everything would always be more efficient. And obviously I always reach to make things more efficient, whether it's through use of technology or other means to try and shorten that period down. But I'd rather have the housing authorities or them speak more, because they know kind of what goes on the other side of that better.
Taniqua, would you point me in the direction of the question? I was answering a question in the chat, and apologize, I don't know which one we're referring to.
No worries. We were just trying to get at the process, right? Someone said that it takes them months, so you know that's kind of deterring from working with the program. So can you talk about that timeline and what it looks like?
Sure. So of course I can only share what our program does, and it might differ from other public housing agencies. But one thing that is pretty standard is that once the property owner has screened and accepted a tenant, they should complete the request for tenancy form. So this is standard across all public housing agencies. It's called an RTA. Some places might call it an RFPA. But this form should then be submitted back to the public housing agency, along with any other required documents that are being asked or collected In our program, it takes 10 business days to review all of the documents submitted. So we're looking at proof of ownership of the unit, whether or not a renter's license is needed, whether or not a lead inspection is needed. We're looking at how much the unit is being rented for, what are comparable rents for market tenants, and then whether or not the family can afford it based on their income. So we're running all of these tests in the background. It takes us about 10 business days. I can tell you that the process goes a lot quicker when all boxes are checked and all form areas are filled out. When something is not completed, even though it might look trivial, typically the form has to go back to the property owner for that box to be checked or completely filled in, and then it has to go under review again. So sometimes the process can be easier when everything is completely filled out accurately. So after that 10 business day time frame, it takes maybe 2 or 3 business days for an inspection to be scheduled. For our program, if the unit passes inspection on the first go round, the family can sign their lease immediately, and that may or may not be similar for other voucher programs.
Thank you. And John, you may have some insight on this. How can a landlord, become affiliated with the program? I see a few people asked about that. If they're interested in renting to voucher holders, what are the steps that they can take to do this?
Sure, it's actually quite easy, Taniqua. If you call in, you can speak with Ted Gutsos. He'll be happy to share with you more info about our program and give you any information that you need. Once we gather that info from you, then we can begin trying to match you with potential tenants that might come along that fit those apartment specifications.
Yes. And also, if you don't call Ted, it's easy. If someone comes in and they say they want to check out your apartment and they want to rent from you, and they tell you that they have a voucher program, then you proceed and treat them as if they were a prospective tenant and applicant that did not have a voucher. And so so Lori, she asked, do we give classes for landlords? So OCA is actually going to collaborate with Pete and Sheila and their folks to host a landlord class coming up. However, I know that right now there are quite a few free landlord education classes that are offered throughout the state. But if you want to follow up, particularly with the good panelists that we have now, definitely look out for our announcement for that program. And so I see.
And maybe we can get John to partner with us on that too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so I see Cindy, she asked, a few questions, made a few comments about the incentives, right? And so some of the panelists today talked a little bit about the incentives. And one comment was made that, the larger landlords have the better incentives, but can someone please chime in and talk about the overall incentives of landlords renting to Section 8 tenants and small landlords in particular?
I'd be happy to just talk about it, and from the perspective of, some programs do have actual, upfront incentives, and it's worth asking the provider, the voucher provider, if there are such incentives for listing a unit or leasing a unit. But just, at a high level, the incentive, again, is just that reliable, timely payment that you're going to be receiving from the program on behalf of that client, and the fact that you're likely to see them stay in the unit far longer. The average market tenant is staying in a unit about 27 months, a little over 2 years. The average voucher tenant nationally has been in their unit for 126 months. So far, far longer, which means, again, that you're not turning over that unit. So just from that perspective, I think that, even if there is a slightly longer lease up process, you know, you're going in the long run, just from a bottom line perspective, you're going to see far more benefit from going with the voucher tenant because you're not going to have to turn over that unit.
Well, and I think depending on, I mean, there's sort of the tangible and business benefits. We're hoping, and I think the folks in Baltimore have found this among the landlords that they've worked with down in their region, is that there are lots of landlords who care about this from a social justice perspective. And if that's something that is on your mind now, maybe you've always cared about it, maybe you're focusing on it more given everything that's gone on recently. That's another reason. It might be a good idea to think about doing this. And Pete's shaking his head, so I think he might have more to add.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Erin. I mean, we survey our landlords annually, and we always ask the question, you know, what made you decide to participate with the program? And almost half who participate with us, they cite the moral mission as one of the main motivating factors. You know, the fact that they see that you know, the difference a home can make to a family, particularly in some of the higher opportunity neighborhoods, particularly for those families with children, you know. So yeah, just from a sort of internal incentive perspective, I hope that some out there have that, you know, that should be a driving factor in your decision to participate.
Thank you. And so, Lori, you have quite a few questions, and we answered some of your questions. So what we would do is we're definitely open to having a side conversation with you. We have, you know, we're short on time, so I want to make sure I try to get to other people's questions. And so this is a 2-in-1. Can you all talk a little bit about, you know, credit scores? There are a lot of landlords who ask Section 8 voucher holders about their credit score, and also repairs. What if a landlord is not interested in doing repairs? And is there a certain amount of money that they need to put aside just for repairs for a Section 8 tenant?
I'd be happy to talk about the credit scores. I do think that this is something that is often a barrier that's put up for voucher tenants. And I think it's something that you as a landlord or as a real estate agent need to think critically about, because again, because there is that guarantee of rent from the program, you know, the screening that you do for your average market tenant on the credit side, you know, doesn't make as much sense, because again, those folks are, you know, there is sort of a guaranteed stream of income from the voucher that would be paying that. So that's just one thing that I think, you know, oftentimes landlords will just keep that stringent credit requirements even for folks with vouchers. And, you know, in most cases, I don't think that makes as much sense. Now, you can ask certainly about the rental history, and you can get landlord references. And, you know, I'd encourage everybody to do that in their screening for all tenants. But, you know, for many of the folks who have vouchers, you're going to find that they have a stellar rental history from the perspective of paying their portion on time, you know, keeping their home up. You know, we hear it from landlords all the time that our tenants are, you know, understand what it takes to keep the house in order and make sure that they protect your investment.
Thank you. And I think, so I didn't see this, but Sheila also answered right. You know, it becomes discrimination once you apply different criteria to different people, because that was the last part of the question, is that discrimination. And so a few people asked about property damages and inspections. So inspections are required for Section 8 applicants. You know, someone comes out and does an inspection of the home and looks at the safety, especially, you know, to make sure there are enough windows, there are exits and things of that sort. Outlets work. But can you talk a little bit about the damages? So someone asked if there are damages made to the home, who pays for that?
So yes, I can talk a little bit about inspections, and I think part of your last question I wanted to touch on as well in terms of inspections, because someone asked, whether or not the landlord could refuse a tenant because an inspection revealed that there were repairs that needed to be made and it would be too expensive. And so the thing with that is, like Taniqua was saying, the housing quality standards are the minimum basic standards for a unit that is livable and safe for any family. So if the inspectors are citing the unit because the sockets are not grounded, or the window won't stay up on its own, or there might be a leak, or these are the types of things that the inspector are looking at. And so if those things have been cited, you would want them to be repaired for any renter, whether or not they were a Section 8 renter or a voucher renter. It's just the minimum standards to make that unit safe for anyone to live in. So you can also find the inspection checklist online, and you can review what an inspector is actually checking off and looking at in each room. But for repairs and damages, most leases should state who's responsible for what type of maintenance, and damages that are beyond normal wear and tear are typically the responsibility of the family. So if the family has damaged the unit beyond normal wear and tear, that would be the responsibility of the family. But regular maintenance of appliances or items in the home that are typically available to the family, like the heating and air conditioning unit. Those things need to be maintained, and those would be the responsibility of the property owner to maintain those types of items. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And Sheila, if possible, someone asked where to find that inspection list. So I'm not sure if anyone has access to that. Can you just put that in the chat for the attendees? And so so Tara asked, she stated and asked, as an agent and landlord, can one get a rental unit approved for a voucher holder before it goes to the market and the application process begins?
I think that might depend on the housing authority. There may be some housing authorities who are doing that, and I think I have talked to housing authorities that do that, and it's really a great policy if it's possible, because then they have a unit ready. But I think it depends a lot on the housing authority. Some just rely on, know that tenants may want to do this search for themselves and find their own place, and so that's the way the program traditionally works. But there are some who are sort of going that extra step to find units, especially in tough markets.
Okay, nice. And so Connie just asked, can a single person without children qualify for a voucher? Yes, they can. And so Nancy, and so we're pushing up on time. I'm gonna make this the last question and then give the panelists an opportunity to give any last closing remarks. So Nancy asked, can condo owners, as opposed to apartment unit owners, rent to voucher recipients in Connecticut? That's a simple one. I thought everyone's going to come off of mute. And do the condo association, I guess docs need to address it. So I guess she's speaking of the documents for the condo association and the board. I assume it would be illegal for a condo association, like an individual corporate rental landlord, to refuse to allow voucher recipients. So her question is, can condo owners rent to Section 8 tenants?
I think they can. I think there'd be a question about looking at the condo agreement and seeing what it says. But they certainly can't say in a condo agreement you can rent, but not to Section 8 voucher holders. That would be illegal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay, so thank you so much. And so I'll give time quickly for the panelists to leave any last minute remarks that you may have, or if there was a question that you wanted to add to, please feel free. Erin, I'll let you close us out. So starting with John, I'm gonna put you on the spot, John.
I think I basically summarized everything, but please, if you haven't reached out to us already, we'd love to connect. So I did drop our contact info in the chat. Please reach out so we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Rob, passing it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everyone for participating and listening to us talk. I think it's a great program, and if anybody has specific questions from our point of view, I'm happy to help going forward and giving some further experience or even some helpful tips, I guess.
Thank you, Pete and Sheila.
Just thank you to everybody for your participation today and for the great questions. And I would encourage you all to think hard about reaching out to one of the local programs and becoming a partner.
And I echo that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll just wrap it up by saying thank you. Thank you for coming. I think one of the things that's gone on over the last year is soul searching across all kinds of areas about why we are so segregated, why there's so much disparity by race and ethnicity. And we know that there's reasons for this across all kinds of areas. We know that the government played a role. We know that the different, housing provider groups played a role over time. And I think this would be a great moment to sort of reverse that and really not just stop doing things that are a problem, but actually actively do things that can help reverse the situation. And, we know that the Section 8 program and the Housing Choice Voucher and the rental assistance program, we can make them better for sure, but they do great things for so many families. And we just love the idea of partnering with you and bringing all your energy around this issue to help lots of families. So thank you for attending today, and we look forward to partnering in the future.
Thank you so much. And please keep your eyes out for an upcoming landlord training. And so this recording will be shared on our website and our Facebook page as well. And we will send the recording link to all of the attendees and registrants. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Erin or I. So thank you again. And the link for the Doing Well While Doing Good guide is also in the chat, and we will share that as well. Thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon and enjoy the good weather. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Great job coordinating everything, Taniqua.